Good morning. This is San Francisco Live's live talks from Bird and Beckett in San Francisco. My name is Denise Sullivan, and really happy to be here this morning. A June gloomy morning in San Francisco. Looks like the sun's breaking through, but my guest today is an artist, a designer, an activist, a musician. And we're going to talk a bit about fair wage work and the arts community in San Francisco. Welcome, Kasey Rios.
I'm really pleased to be here in Bird and Beckett, our home of culture in Glen Park and in San Francisco, jazz and books. Couldn't be better.
Thank you. Well, as is a custom when you speak somewhere, I think you'd like to say a few words about where we stand.
Well, this morning, it's important for us, as every morning, to acknowledge that we are on the unceded homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone, and we give respect and honor to the ancestors and to the living people who are our guides in caretaking this land. If we are, as we are wise, we thank them for their long, patient stewardship and hope that we can live up to that high standard.
Thank you. And, you kind of gave me a perfect segue because the land acknowledgement is something that a lot of organizations have incorporated into their opening rituals and remarks and presentations, right? And it's now a few years into it. It's almost expected and necessary, and they become part of the words. Please turn off your cell phones and and the land acknowledgement. And here the thing is, you actually have a relationship with the Ramaytush Ohlone people and organization stewarding the land because that's your work, and so you have collaborated, or they are leading this restoration of the land with other organizations like yours. So thank you.
Well, we're both walking in grace on this land, and I'm so grateful for my partnership with the Ramaytush Ohlone. They have been very generous in helping guide our work. We've been given responsibility for caretaking some of the significant public land in downtown San Francisco, and that only made sense to me with their guidance. And Chairman Jonathan Cordero is a really bright light. I consider him a friend and a teacher, and I think we can't ever expect immediate changes, but sometimes we are surprised, and I think working together we can make things somewhat better. That's the hope.
Yeah. Well, I know that you collaborated on the federal building plaza, right? So why don't you tell me a little bit about the project, the genesis of that project, and where it stands now, and then the forthcoming activities.
Well, the demonstration gardens has been activating public spaces in downtown San Francisco, and we were, because of that, because of our work in expressive arts, and significantly one of them being gardening with our neighbors, with our community, we were invited to be the community partners with the GSA in renovating, redesigning the federal building plaza that is now about to be named after our speaker, Nancy Pelosi. We started in 2018. Demonstration Gardens has been working since, I guess we're in our 14th year. And so they invited us to be sort of a gateway to help bring in the community and help make sure that the renovation, the redesign, the reimagining fits for the neighborhood. Now, we've been through a lot in this neighborhood in the last 5 years, and it's always a negotiation, public spaces, but it's ongoing. And with Chairman Jonathan's help, we discovered that this is a significant place for the Ramaytush Ohlone, and so we have in our work dedicated it as the Living Waters Environmental Justice Learning Center. It's the first of its kind in this area, and it's based on the idea that the living water, the water that is generated from the earth actions, is sacred. And that area used to be a marsh that led to the bay. It's connected with the underground Hayes Creek. So that watershed, which is also connected with the United Nations Plaza, is all sacred space.
Wow, that's just beautiful, really, when you think about it. But let's get more specific about this place, this space that you're talking about. That's gone through a lot in the last few years. It's called the Tenderloin, right? And that is a neighborhood that people now from around the world know and identify with San Francisco, and they have their perceptions of the Tenderloin. And you have quite a different experience living there and working there as an artist and as a community organizer. And now this connection with the land, which dates back to your beginning as a public gardener. I mean, it's quite different than what we read about in the paper.
Well, the Tenderloin is many things, but it's not what we see. The projection that you're talking about is what Edward Tufte called a confection. It's designed to create a certain effect, and you see it in neighborhoods all over the world, really, where there's a desire to do more extreme rent taking, and so they send the values way down so that they can pump up the volume on the rent taking. And who pays are the people of the neighborhood. The Tenderloin is a neighborhood. It's also an artist colony. It's one of the last affordable places where artists can live, and so there's a very high concentration of artists, of people. UN Plaza is well placed there because the people of the United Nations are all around it. Mm-hmm. And it's actually vibrant and friendly and predominantly safe. I encounter people from all walks of life there, which is what we want in our neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. A living neighborhood has people of all income levels. But there is one significant thing that's different, and that is the Tenderloin is underpopulated with trees. It really needs more green space. And so we've been working to build a green mosaic through the Tenderloin and Soma, working with our partners on both sides of Market Street, because that division is somewhat artificial because the peoples go across and the needs go across. But trees is one thing that the city could do to make that neighborhood better and safer. We know that life expectancy is 15 years less in neighborhoods without trees to the extent that we have.
Right. So, I mean, you have like science and environmentalists, like urban designers and planners. They all support this idea of a more green urban space, right? And yet you have city government and developers for profit and other forces that are like working against this proven, idea that trees, living things, water, good for people, sustains life. But every time, we have folks trying to work toward these goals, well, they're not goals, they're human rights essentials.
Values.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. They're being shut down at every turn. And yet, folks like you need to keep going because these transformations can take decades, right, and years. And so I asked you about the project at the Federal Plaza because, and bear with us because this conversation has many tentacles, but that is a public space for people. And that is a victory of sorts that you have created a space on living water that is welcoming, that does not prevent sitting down and enjoying, the environment just because a person doesn't conform to some standard that people think that they should be conforming to in this particular space, right? They don't look a certain way. They don't act a certain way. This is public space. It is available to everyone. And you and your cohorts created it and made it happen.
Well, and in partnership with the GSA, the Government Services Administration.
So at the federal level, you are seeing change in cooperation. It's the local level that is a little trickier.
Well, I think because of the complexity that you outlined of all the different competing, not just valuations of the land, but value systems, we do have difficulty negotiating open space for people first. One suggestion that I could offer my colleagues at the City and County of San Francisco, who I value them as individuals greatly, one suggestion would be start by asking us. One thing that is in common between all of our different cities who are going through these kinds of changes, whether it be Detroit or Austin, or and farther afield, Mexico City, Paris, one of the ways that you see resilience built is by asking the people who live around the space, putting them in charge. We take a page out of labor's book, organized labor's book, and say, it's not paternalism that we need. We are able to manage our own affairs. And whenever you have top-down decision-making, you see the symptoms in illness in public space. Yeah. If we flipped it and put the people in charge, we can make good decisions about our space. We will always choose green and enough a healthy space for our children to play and our seniors to age in dignity. We're the city of St. Francis. One thing you might not know about me is I'm a Franciscan associate, and I want to shout out to my dear friends at Faithful Fools who sustain me and keep me going in this work. I think if we look to Franciscan values and say we are the least of these, and think about our support from our ancestors, the trees, because they are our DNA ancestors. We can't breathe without them. And that's part of what's going on, is we have a deficit. So now I'll ask you to forgive me. I ranged pretty far there, but but resilience and asking the people who are really impacted the most. That's a basic principle of environmental justice.
Yeah, and the the way that it gets done, the work gets done by people doing the work and being paid for
That's
the
right.
work, right?
Very important. So in neighborhoods where property values are high everywhere you look in San Francisco, but in neighborhoods where there are more resources, you can depend on volunteers to do more of the work of greening. In our very dense neighborhoods where incomes are so low, it's not ethical to ask that people volunteer to support the green space that we must have to be. And the other thing is if you look to other cities that have been successful in controlling I'm not really comfortable with the word gentrification, but let's call it income exclusion of areas. Gentrification is fine, but I don't want to complicate it too much. But the peoples who are successful hire, both ask and hire the people, so to take care of their own spaces and their own affairs. And we can also extrapolate that to, as I said, the Tenderloin is an art colony. One of the big arts that's practiced there is music. And we're sitting in essentially a shrine of music right now in Bird and Beckett because the musicians who flow through here are the musicians of the Bay Area. And this place has, the reason why that happens is because Eric here and the Cultural Legacy group is determined to make sure that musicians get paid a fair wage. And it's a wonderful exemplar. We need to translate that. And that, so it's not cultural workers being paid a fair wage. It's not limited to gardeners. We want to think about all the people that provide the cultural backbone of our neighborhoods.
Yeah, I mean, for those of us who are kind of in it, whether we are artists or we are even, patrons of businesses like this, or just committed to the idea of having a diverse, culturally vibrant city, I think part of what you're talking about is the principle and the idea of equity. Again, it's like one of these buzzwords. We hear it a lot, and these organizations are attempting to incorporate the concept into their diversity and inclusion, and everybody seems to kind of miss the equity part, if that is clear.
It's hard. That's why.
It's hard because it means that we have to open the door to this area of it's a lot. When are we talking about reparations? Are we talking about compensation? Are we just talking about ability to work? I mean, it is a human right, but the door has been closed for so long. I mean, it's almost like weird because it taps into this whole toppling of white supremacy. Really.
Well, that's the reason why it's hard, is because it's so ingrained.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean it's not possible. And I think that if we, so as you say, the principle is being talked about, it's being built into policy. We need to be about it, not just talk about it.
Yeah.
And and that's that was what that idea is what started the demonstration gardens for me. Is I was a technologist, I was a scholar, and I found myself less healthy than I wanted to be, and I realized, I have to actually roll my sleeves up. I have to do stuff, and so part of that doing is one of the reasons why it's hard is it looks like sacrifice, but what you get from a really equitable environment, which of course is it's a notion because we don't really have it. Mm-hmm. But as we reach for it, every step we take, we get more vibrance, more vitality. And so what you think you may be giving up in terms of comfort or power, actually we get health, we get vitality, mm-hmm. we get the ability to talk to people who are different. We're all different from each other. That's a huge resource. We need to keep that ability. Our garden came from the YMCA at 220 Golden Gate. That the Grotto of Compassion that was built on the top of 220 Golden Gate came out of the last pandemic. And that was institutional support for people coming together and taking care of each other, and organizing. It was one of the beginnings of organizing to support each other during the HIV/AIDS pandemic. That collection of plants, my teacher, is now, it doesn't exist anymore. It was wiped out by the Department of Public Works, did a sweep of homeless folk out of a place that we had permission to be, and the city wiped out our garden, our 50-year-old collection of plants as well. It was just a baby and the bathwater kind of situation, and it's those kind of painful events make it really difficult sometimes to work with the city, but we have to do it, and we have to, all of us, do our work together. Mm-hmm. We have to find a way mm-hmm. to do it. So that collection lives on in my memory and experience, and guides me that we can demonstrate our values in physical space. And when we do it together, when we work together, it shows. Yeah.
When we first started talking, I was having a hard time understanding how the demonstration garden, translated into fair wages for musicians. And I was like, and I totally get it now. Okay. But I can understand that it might be difficult for someone who's just entering the story now. Like, what? The Tenderloin? I thought they were going to talk about fentanyl, or now they're talking about trees, But it's all connected.
What you focus on expands.
Yeah. There you go. So you went back to, like, preserving the culture, and let's just, by example, you're on, like, historic cultural ground. What did you call it? Like sacred ground.
Sacred.
Yeah. The Tenderloin, home to, historic jazz events in the city, right? No longer is it that hub, but there are vestiges of that past, and some of the folks still living and playing.
Hyde Street Studios.
And Hyde Street Studios is still a working studio, so we'll get back to that in a minute. But that said, in terms of, like, the support for live jazz in the neighborhood, and people making it a destination and whatnot, not really happening there. It's coming back, but we have a place like Bird and Beckett where accomplished musicians can come, mm-hmm. perform, be paid, and it's kind of a holding it's kind of a holding space, right? Is
Right.
what we call it, and to keep the culture alive in this kind of impermanent situation that we're in until we reach those goals of having the permanent abode, the sacred space that lives. I mean, sure, jazz is here, the music's in the air, but we want a house for it, right? So this is the house for now, and that in an ideal situation, San Francisco will revive itself, will put an effort into supporting musicians, artists, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And we will be that world class, arts and culture city that are. We've had that reputation and purportedly are, but I don't really see that much evidence of it at work at the institutional level, but I do see it at work on the street level. So this idea of what you're talking about from the ground up
Mm-hmm.
is really the way it's going to happen. Because if we
Exactly.
leave it in the hands of folks who like have no idea, but think that the best idea would be to have like an entertainment zone at the waterfront, like what? It's not really going to fly. So that is kind of a roundabout way of saying, how are we going to do it? And how have cities like Detroit, which I think is a really great example,
Mm-hmm.
and it's easy for me to connect because I'm familiar with the city and I know the story, but and Paris and Mexico City and Austin, like you say, how did these cities uh, gather the support for their cultural uh, communities, and how are they able to sustain it in the face of these economic tides, which San Francisco seems really susceptible to, like a little shift in the wind, and here we are.
It's about investment, where you put your investments. If you invest in the gold rush, when the gold rush goes away, then everything is in danger. If you invest in the most resilient resources, which are our cultural workers, you make sure that the backbone that supports cultural work is sturdy, then culture is robust and you can absorb all the wonderful new things as they come along, and you can maintain. I think conservation is a really important word because culture is very easy to scrape off. It's very hard. It's a magical thing. You can't just say, "Oh, let's move the culture to the waterfront because that's better for real estate prices." No, you have to preserve it. It's like a forest. A forest is much more productive than any stand of new trees that you're going to plant. It takes many years, and the mortality rate for new trees in San Francisco is deplorable, something like 60% in the Tenderloin. So you have to really invest in the real sources, the true sources of resilience. And all of those cities that we've named, it's not perfect anywhere, but where it's working, that's the mechanism that's happening. You have organized labor as part of the equation. I want to shout out to our partners at Local 87. They're feeling a lot of pain with this boom bust kind of situation. So how can the city better support our cultural workers, which include the people who care for our spaces?
Mm-hmm. You mean at the very basic level of cleaning and maintaining?
Absolutely.
Yes, yes. And
let's talk about dignity.
Yeah, and those folks cannot be out of any equation
Exactly
that we're talking about.
We need to be included in all of the equations. So
yes.
those of us who work to maintain our spaces, whether it's gardening, whether it's building maintenance, making our buildings greener. It needs to be a scaffolding. And if the city wants a fast result, it's like pouring Miracle Grow on a plant. It'll grow really fast and be really green, but then it won't last. And so you really have to be patient and cultivate. And that's what I'm advocating for is patient cultivation.
Right.
And in the real sources of resilience, which I see as our cultural workers.
And so that looks like education,
Absolutely.
training, mentorship.
Yes.
Because that idea that young people, children, and students need to be able to see people doing jobs that they can potentially do in the city and in the world around them. And when that disappears, there is no track to the future. All hope is lost, and then you get a drain from your neighborhood or your city where people go elsewhere for opportunity.
Well, and I will say that it's a very common pattern now for people of my generation. Shout out to Ross Joseph, my partner in life. We raised our children here in the city, and no one can afford to live in San Francisco. And so that huge resource, it happens across our generation of it's more and more rare for someone who was actually born here to be able to find a foothold and raise a family here. And we want that to shift. We need that to shift. If that doesn't shift, what do we have? We invest in a generation, and the generation has to leave. We have to have that. Again, that's part of the scaffolding, so that what that might look like in practice is with the Local 87, they ask us at the demonstration gardens to craft an apprenticeship program for young people in children of their families who often work as janitors, their children to be able to be trained as audio engineers. Well, it's huge because audio engineers can't afford to live here either. And so we've had a great exodus of technical staff in San Francisco. If we want to have the ballet, if we want to have Moscone Center, if we want to have the Jazz Center, we have to have audio engineers to do this work. And the union has difficulty fulfilling its contracts, the sound engineering union, YATSE, because people have left during the pandemic, attrited due to retirement. We have to train up the next generation. So that's one way it can look, is the Bright Sound Apprenticeship Program is an example of how that can, but that needs investment. It can't be just talk. We need partnership from the city to make it happen. And that it's like a lot of other things. We can see a way, but we need partnership, significant investment in the Independent Musicians Alliance fund for a guaranteed fair wage. We're advocating for that, that the city support that fund and also support the principle by building it into public policy. We want it part of the general plan that musicians and technicians get paid a fair wage.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's interesting. I would like to help you spread the word and get some of my friends in the arts involved in this campaign for fair wages. And I will just tell you, it's kind of my experience is that there are those artists who apply for the grants and get the grants, and they're part of that grant industrial complex. And then there are those who are just like, no, I don't do that. I don't take grants. Well, partly I'm one of those folks because I can't even read the application without going crazy. And so so how do we get folks like kind of on the same page? Because there really isn't any hope, the way that I see it, if we're all over here doing our own things, devoted to this system that works for us and this one doesn't work for me, but how we're just trying to get a gig and get by, you know?
Well, I think we have to take a page again out of our friends with organized labor. I think if we don't find a way for collective action, collective training, we, as you say, there's a little hope. However, with that, when we fight, we win, and we also have to fight the inclination in ourselves to be every person for themselves, and to recognize that when we're working for equity, we've already won in a certain way. Now, paying for parking, paying for cartage for a gig, the Independent Musicians Alliance is a really good place to start. You know, if you want to talk to your friends about how they can support venues who do this. Bird and Beckett, Keys is another, Keys in North Beach. Go out and hear live music. If you're in a place, ask them, do you pay a fair wage to the musicians? Support the Independent Musicians Alliance. We provide micro grants for very little overhead for things like parking, for things like rehearsal time. And so musicians can join the alliance and get that level of support. But more importantly, what we get from it is much more about collective action. Yeah. So that's one way you can be an ally of the work through the IMA. Come to Bird and Beckett and hear jazz and pay the cover charge. It's not a lot, and it's not a lot in money, but it means a lot in terms of keeping the culture alive.
Yeah, well, I agree, and I think it's a heavy lift for educating musicians who are accustomed to. It's like they're participating in their own oppression, you know.
All of us.
yeah, and it really angers me. I have been inside the music business, right? And I left a job because I couldn't participate in the kind of exploitation that I was being asked to wage on artists. And yet, you know, I understand. I mean, look, we all have to do what we have to do to survive, right? And I think that it's like, again, it's toppling a system that is just so entrenched and internalized for some of us that it's going to take time.
We have to give people options. That's what the IMA is about, and that's what our work with the other unions is about, is trying to reach out to our partners in the city who really want a vibrant culture, and to say, let's make this happen. The city has mechanisms that can support. We as a cultural community have mechanisms to support in the kind of ally support that you were talking about, and then we together, that'll be the measure of our success, is if we can actually do it.
Right, and you know, you're talking about making this policy, right? So that if the fair wage is not being paid, that there will be consequences.
Well, you want a carrot and a stick. So the carrot would be the fund that helps subsidize venues to pay directly musicians more. Right. That way, musicians are I mean, people actually all want to do the right thing,
Right.
but we just don't know what it is sometimes. And if we make it policy, policy is really our friend. If we make it policy,
Yes.
then there's a really good chance that more and more people will comply. The fund will grow. Maybe it could be fed by the hotel tax fund or other sources that traditionally feed larger cultural expression.
Mm-hmm.
But this is it's a different way of thinking. It's about supporting the ecosystem as opposed to individual large
Right.
resources to think about how do we spread it out over this area, because we all want a place in our neighborhood where there's live music.
Mm-hmm.
3 places, how about? Let's have some more bookstores. Let's
Right.
have places that are well springs
Yeah.
for resilience in the neighborhood. And downtown is a neighborhood too, and that's one of the things that we're seeing reinforced right now, is that if you don't invest in it, it doesn't just magically survive.
Yeah.
It
Things
has
will
to
go
be
away.
it has to be supported.
Yeah, and so the idea paying musicians more, because that, I think that folks will hear us paying musicians more. It's like, yeah, so they can continue to work here and live here, and maybe even, God forbid, have studio space here. It was something that was quite common at one time, where artists and musicians would come to a city like San Francisco. They would be able to live, okay, on the cheap, but,
For sure.
okay, and maybe even have a place to rehearse or record. All those places have gone away. Hyde Street is an institution, but the small recording studios, the storefront recording studios, those are starting to go away because of the rents, etc. So you see the drain of the studio, the small studio. You see the drain of the musicians themselves, who can no longer afford to work here. And what do we have left? We have a city without music. I mean, that's
there is a thriving community here, but it's in spite of.
That's right.
And what would it be like if we actually gave it support? So then we might actually see ourselves. Okay, so San Francisco's the city that knows how. Well, we got to be the city that actually does it, as
There
well
you
as
go.
knowing how to do it. We
Yeah.
have to actually do it. And
Yeah.
if we do, then we can latch on to some of the generational sort of adaptations that are going on all over the place. Because yes, studios are disappearing. Meanwhile, technology is more available. So why is there still a gap? We could address it. It's not impossible. I'm aware of Sources bookstore in Detroit. Want to shout out to all the independent booksellers all over the place, because that's a sort of an anchor of culture in a neighborhood. If you go to a new place and you search and you see, oh, there's a bookstore, okay, there's going to be good coffee around the bookstore. And so we want to preserve that kind of network, that ecosystem approach.
Yeah.
I think.
Speaking of that, I mean, there really isn't a bookstore downtown anymore. We've seen the closures, like one after another, of bookstores downtown. And it's kind of like, when the bookstore goes, then a lot of things go. But the community that surrounds it is really imperiled, because it's a meeting place. It's a place where news is disseminated, and where people just gather, and for their health and their spirit.
We need significant third spaces just to be. When the YMCA was removed from the Tenderloin in the way that it had been as a major institution, it's still there. But you can see that everything changed. And so we have to really be serious about our third spaces. And as I say that, the work should be joyful, as opposed to medicine that we have to take. This is a reach for abundance. And your point about equity, as we work towards equity, that means abundance for everyone. That means more visible expression of joy and exuberance. And so let's not think about it as a sacrifice and taking medicine. I mean, we have our city, for the population that we have one of the largest budgets of any city in the world. We can do it. It's a matter of political will, I think, and it's also, as you pointed out, kind of getting over ourselves and recognizing that part of the problem is not being willing to cast in our lot and say, okay, yeah, I'm going to choose to play in the places that are striving for the guaranteed fair wage. I'm going to choose that whenever I can, and also help promote it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that disparity, when you look at the amount of resources, the wealth, I mean just the sheer wealth, and I don't mean that billionaires, which there are many here, more than anywhere else, we might add, billionaires and people with significantly less, but just the infrastructure and the people power that could be tapped into to make something really beautiful. And yet there's this sort of complacency, and I do understand, the my three jobs syndrome.
Oh well,
yeah,
we lose our hats.
I understand why people can't go all in, but for those with the resources and the time and the passion, I guess, it's all here for us to seize, and this is the moment.
I do think you're right about it being an inflection point. I personally feel the availability of a dynamic healing response. When there's been a great trauma, that's when dynamic healing can really take effect, but it's time sensitive. And so being complacent, sort of buying into, well, I'm just going to be apathetic until something changes here, that we can't afford. If we want to take advantage of this dynamic healing impulse. Now, when people who have been really traumatized, it's like a plant. I've learned so much from my teachers, the plants in the demonstration gardens. If a plant is damaged, all of the enzymes rush to the place of damage to create new roots, to create new health. And we can take advantage of that same, it's part of us as well. And so I'm saying let's do it. I think it'll be fun.
yeah. And I do get the time, the clock is ticking, and we need to take action now. Before we go, and I do have to check our time here, but I do want to hear more about your personal practice as an artist, and what you do to keep your spirit healthy and foster resilience personally.
Well, thank you for that question. I am sustained by my family and friends, and I'm so grateful to be able to walk in these really beautiful places in San Francisco and Detroit and Austin. Buffalo is another really beautiful city, and I'm grateful to be able to learn again from the plant communities, but also from my neighbors and friends. Some people do surveys. I do puppetry, and so the Thunder Puppets grew up alongside of the demonstration gardens. So I'm trained as a geographer and a conceptual designer, designing technological systems for learning a lot. But the best way to find out from people what they need is to ask them. But a survey isn't always the best way when you're working with different language systems and you are coming from different backgrounds. But collaborative storytelling is a really good resource for me to find out what people want and what we think about our spaces. And besides that, it's really fun. I learned it from my friends Sally Rodwell and Alan Brunton from New Zealand. 40 years ago, they taught me shadow puppetry.
Oh, wow.
And the process of building stories in community. And so that's a strategy that sustains me. It's a theater in the round. Literally, it's round. Wow. And so there's that. I don't know about our timing, but I definitely want to. One of the images that keeps me going, the United Nations Plaza. It's barren. It's stark. Mm-hmm. The charter was crafted just a few blocks away in the building where the Y was, where the now many people live. The UN Charter was crafted here in San Francisco. Yeah. We should be celebrating it at the United Nations Plaza by curating that sacred space. We can create an emblem for that work by planting redwood trees around the United Nations Plaza and rededicating it to our indigenous guides for this area. In the United Nations Plaza, there is no recognition of our First Nations people. It's a huge deficit. If we start to correct those fundamental deficits, then we may see some of them. I would say we must see correction of some of the symptoms of malaise that many people complain about and what you hear about in the media about the Tenderloin. Yeah. That if we're caring for that space as a sacred space, it will be healed, and we can then use that. It will radiate out and help us. It'll teach us how to heal the rest of the city. It'll be emblematic of the work.
What a beautiful vision, and it kind of started with, it's been going on for decades, but most recently kind of the toppling of the old statues, that's like, okay, those are gone. So now what's going to take their place? And the idea of a redwood forest or a circle, it's just beautiful. And it kind of calls to mind, like you mentioned, the last pandemic, and how from that we got the AIDS Memorial Grove in Golden Gate Park. Mm-hmm. Is the National AIDS Monument, right?
Right.
Here in San Francisco, which was the, center, along with New York, with a lot of AIDS work, and we built that home there for people from all over the world to witness and remember. In a post-COVID world, there should be some kind of a similar dedication. And as you say, why aren't we celebrating the UN conference and the indigenous folks who seeded the land? I mean, it's just like
did not seed,
did not,
never have, never will.
you know, why are we not erecting more monuments in that name? It makes sense. Like all of a sudden, it's like, boom. You know, it's like the more people that can see this vision, and I think artists already see it.
Well, Chairman Jonathan said, we don't want more statues. We want trees. Right now, what we have at UN Plaza is pictures of trees. And that's emblematic also of where we are right now. We don't want pictures of trees. We want real trees. Yes, it's an investment to care for them. We want the people of the neighborhood to be hired to care for them. We want, and how many times have I been in UN Plaza and people traveling from far away have come and they're so excited and they get there and they say, where is it? Oh, we're there. But where is it? So there's nothing to tell people. We could have a welcome center there. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of space for lease right around UN Plaza. And we could have a welcome center that welcomes visitors instead of sweeps people who are homeless. We could create a flea market. It doesn't have to be in the market, but it could be nearby so that you come and there's live commerce from all over the world because we have our neighbors who are from all over the world. So I believe if we invest in the trees and the people, if we invest in the culture, if we activate it with music, it should be a joyful place. And put the neighborhood in charge as opposed to coming up with one solution or another solution, and they're all very expensive. This doesn't have to be that expensive.
Yeah, and I love that. It really does address the situation where, you know, one short-term solution is, well, we can activate a space for 3 months and put artists in it and that'll do the trick. And it's like, not really. No, this is more, like you say, an investment, a commitment, and it illustrates that everything is connected. It's the trees, it's the people, it's the space, it's the no sweeps, it's
the sense of welcome
to our city. And it's our city. It's not their city. It's our city.
Well, everybody's welcome, but the table belongs to the people.
Yeah.
So everybody can come to the table, but you can't own it. And that's the difference. And that's what I've really learned from working with. So I work closely with our Filipino community that also surrounds that neighborhood, and great teachers. And I'm so happy to be able to have different images to work with, because the idea that there are sun spaces and there are moon spaces. Sun spaces, the sun is the source of energy for us. It's our star. That's originating energy. Sun spaces are where the people are. Moon spaces, the moon reflects the sun's energy. It's not a source of energy. Moon spaces are City Hall, our courts, our means of maintaining infrastructure like DPW. Those are reflected of the people's power. And when the sun and the moon are in their proper place, if we reflect that in our working with each other, then a lot of the illness that we see manifest will be removed, will be healed, will be taking steps in the right direction. It's not overnight. We need 100-year plan. Do we want our city to be here in 100 years, 1,000 years? Yeah. Let's have 100-year plan for our trees. Yeah. And for our education system. Not a 5-year plan, not based on election cycles. 100 years. That's the scale that we need.
Yeah. Well, thank you for doing this resilience work, Kasey, and for kind of being a guiding force in turning this thing around. I invite folks to visit your website, right? And to come back to the Bird and Beckett site because we can lead you to Kasey that way as well. But if you want to go ahead and give the.
Well, we're the demonstrationgardens.org, and you can find me physically in near the intersection of Turk and Hyde. If you see the big mural of Miles and Billy there, my office is right across the street at Hyde Street Studios. Another fine creative community. We let's see, where else can you find us? You can find me here at Bird and Beckett, and also I encourage everyone to check out the Independent Musicians Alliance and find out what that's all about. Look into it for yourself. See what you think. To my friends in Detroit, you know where to find me at Los Arcos, and I'm grateful for everyone. I'm grateful for you. Thank you for making space for this conversation to happen and for your attention to this matter. I feel like there's some, as Gertrude said, there's some here. So
Yeah.
let's work on it.
Yeah, I feel like there is the will here, and really, it's about changing the story. You know, like you said so many times, storytelling is part of it, and if we change the narrative about San Francisco and where we're going, you know, it doesn't have to be the doom loop. We can have this 100-year plan that includes trees and resilience and health and wellness for all of our people. Thank you so much, Kasey.
Well, thank you, Denise. I'm grateful.
We'll see you next time. San Francisco Lives. Thanks, Eric. Thanks, Jenna, Gabby, Bird and Beckett.
All right.